Haunting facts about serial killers that you'll want to forget, Part 1. After raping his blindfolded victims, the Golden State Killer would be super quiet and pretend like he was gone, and right when the victims would try to untie themselves or go for their phone, he would scare the hell out of them. Jeffrey Dahmer attempted to make sex zombies out of his victims by drilling holes into their head while they were still alive and pouring acid into the holes. American serial killer Albert Fish once cooked and ate a little girl and sent a letter to her parents describing how she tasted. Colombian serial killer Pedro Alonso Lopez raped and murdered over 300 girls. He was in prison for 18 years when he was moved to a psychiatric hospital where they declared him to be sane and he was set free, even though he stated that he planned on killing again. He was released in 1998 and no one knows where he is or what he's doing.
The good news is that the FBI has finally identified the Zodiac killer. The bad news is it unfortunately is not Ted Cruz, thus he can still stay in Congress. And Air Force veteran Gary Francis Post has been dead since 2018, so we'll never get any more answers or face any justice for his victims. However, with the help of his DNA and new DNA technology, there are 5 more cold cases that may be solved, and maybe because of him too. Enjoy being John Wayne Gacy's cuck for eternity in hell.
Breaking news, authorities have found missing 2-year-old Josiah deceased. Authorities say Josiah was originally reported missing on August 16th by his father. His father claimed that he was taken during a robbery at the Aspen Woods Apartments in Decatur, Georgia. However, his father was arrested a day later for making false statements and filing a false report. On August 17th, East Point police took over the investigation and said that Josiah was actually last seen at the Lakeview Apartments where his father lives. Soon after, authorities could be seen canvassing a landfill as well as a body of water. On August 18th, authorities drained the body of water, however, they did not find Josiah. As of today, authorities say a body was found at the East Point transfer station on Martin Street. They have not confirmed that the body is that of Josiah's, however, the police chief says he does not think it is a coincidence. At a news conference on Wednesday, authorities believe additional charges against his father will be pending. I'll keep you guys updated. What do you think? Drop in the comments.
This is Australia's worst female serial killer, or at least she was, until last month when new evidence came to light that proved her innocence all along. In 2003, Kathleen Folbigg was sentenced to 25 years in prison for murdering her 3 children, 2 girls, Sarah and Laura, and 1 son, Patrick, as well as manslaughter against her other son, Caleb, between the years 1989 and 1999. Here's what happened. All 4 Folbigg children died in their sleep when they're only 19 days old to 18 months old. Her son, Caleb, was the first Folbigg child to pass, who everyone initially thought died of sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. But then when her other 2 infant daughters, Sarah and Laura, died suddenly with no explanation, that's when the rumors began to swirl of foul play. Eventually, those rumors took an ugly form that Kathleen must have smothered each of her children to death. Her husband divorced her in 2000, believing the rumors to be true. Then a year later in 2001 is when she was officially arrested and convicted in a trial that became a 7-week media circus. The thing was, there was no concrete evidence that Kathleen had smothered any of her children, or was the cause of her children's untimely death in any way. So what led to her ultimate conviction? The jury sealed her fate based on a personal diary entry that her husband turned over to the police. Kathleen writes, quote, "The guilt about them all haunts me," which the prosecution of course used to imply Kathleen's apparent guilt for killing her children. The defense vehemently argued that this was all circumstantial evidence, but the power of the media and public opinion prevailed and the jury found her guilty. For 3 decades, Kathleen has maintained her innocence. Kathleen already served 20 of those 25 years, which was finally released on June 5th, 2023, because it was discovered that all 4 of her children died of natural causes. But how?
Mommy told me something a little girl should know. It's all about the devil.
This teenager is accused of killing his ex, then sitting in a room with her corpse for hours. 18-year-old Natalie Martin was just like any other young girl letting her hair down after graduating. She was recently on holiday celebrating with a group of her friends after graduating Philo High School in Duncan Falls, Ohio. They were staying at a rental home in South Carolina. Natalie's ex-boyfriend, 18-year-old Blake Linkus, was also there with the group. The pair had actually broken up in February this year, as apparently Blake had grown violent. On one occasion, he, quote, took her and threw her across the room. On June the 5th, the day before her death, Blake and Natalie had apparently been arguing because he found out she'd been texting someone else. On the fateful night in question, the group had been out clubbing when Natalie decided to go home because she felt unwell. Blake also went back with her. Around 9 a.m. the next morning, Blake came out of his room covered in blood. He was shouting that Natalie wasn't waking up. Blake had seemingly stabbed himself in the chest after killing Natalie. When two members of the group tried to attempt CPR on Natalie, they said it was way too late, she was cold and stiff. This suggests that she had been deceased for a long time and Blake had seemingly sat in the room with her corpse.
Breaking news, a mother of two has been taken against her will and had her life taken by her deceased husband's friend. Authorities say the woman's husband passed away in spring due to an unspecified illness. 6 days ago, one of her late husband's friends arrived at her home. The victim's employer said, quote, he had fallen on hard times and she offered to let him stay in her basement. However, on August 18th, she invited the suspect to come have drinks with her and a few colleagues from work. That was the day that she was last seen. Shortly after arriving home from having drinks with colleagues, she was on the phone with one of her friends when the line went dead and she apparently was SHOT. Then on August 19th, after a long police chase and over 300 miles away, they found the suspect with the woman deceased in the vehicle. The woman's employer stated that the suspect may have had romantic feelings for her, but she did not have them mutually. At this time, it is not immediately clear how the suspect knew the woman's deceased husband. Co-workers also stated that the woman has daughters ages 7 and 8. The suspect is currently in jail in Tennessee and waiting to be brought back to Ohio to face charges. I'll keep you guys updated. What do you think? Drop in the comments.
What happened to what media labeled as the TikTok murderer Zachary Latham? On May 4th, 2020, 18-year-old Zach's life changed forever. Media outlets flooded everyone's timelines with one main accusation.
Of killing his neighbor in New Jersey to become famous on TikTok.
He wanted to be TikTok famous.
Was fame on TikTok a motive for a killing?
You may not know this, but he was released this year and I was able to have a one-on-one live interview with him. Let me tell you, you are not prepared for this video.
Cannibal facts that'll eat at you for days. Part 4. This footage from a CNN documentary shows journalist Reza Aslan talking to a member of the Agori sect. Later in the video, he consumes a portion of a human brain that the cannibals offer him. This CCTV footage from 2010 shows Stephen Griffiths flipping off the camera after shooting a woman in the back with a crossbow. He killed and ate 3 sex workers and has been dubbed the Crossbow Cannibal. In 2003, South Korean serial killer Yoo Young-chil murdered 21 people and ate the livers of several of his victims. Ronald William Brown was a puppeteer on a Christian TV show called Joy Junction. The show has since been taken off air after he was convicted of conspiring with another man to eat a boy at his church. There are actually Yahoo chat logs from the incident detailing their exact plan. In May 2018, the Reddit user Incredibly Shiny Shart made a post discussing how he legally cooked and shared his amputated foot with 10 of his friends. He was forced to remove it because of a motorcycle accident and reportedly asked his friends, "Remember how we always talked about how if we ever had the chance to ethically eat human meat, would you do it?" This conversation led the friends to eating his severed foot.
Did you know that this man from Japan suffered one of the most gruesome deaths in history? If not, then you definitely want to hear about this. On September 30, 1999, the 35-year-old man named Hisashi Aochi and 2 other men were working at the nuclear power plant in Tokaimura, Japan under a tight deadline to convert uranium hexafluoride into enriched uranium. But Aochi and his coworkers attempted to take a shortcut to meet their deadline, which resulted in a horrific explosion directly exposing the 3 men to harmful radiation. By the time Aochi arrived at the hospital, his body was already covered in burns, and his eyes were leaking blood. At first, the doctors tried countless skin grafts, blood transfusions, and even stem cell transplants, but sadly none of the procedures worked. Pain was so overwhelming that Aochi repeatedly begged the doctors for his death, but his family insisted that the doctors keep trying experimental treatments and do whatever it takes to keep him alive. As days went by, Aochi's skin began to melt from his body and even suffered 3 heart attacks in 1 hour. And the crazy part was that every time he was brought back to life, he suffered brain damage. Aochi's suffering went on for 83 days straight, and on December September 21st, 1999, Auchi mercifully passed away after his last heart attack due to multi-organ failure.
It's just a cigarette, and it cannot be that bad. Honey, don't you love me?
Hi, I'm Ethan, and we'll be diving into crazy crime cases with insane twists I didn't see coming. On March 4th, 2008, 17-year-old Carolyn Watson and 22-year-old Julian Buchwald went to Australia's Alpine National Park. Julian had once proposed to Carolyn in the past, however she declined as she wasn't ready, so we decided to give it another go by taking her to a pretty park. Unfortunately, the couple were abducted by members of a satanic cult, and 6 hours later they were driven and dropped off naked in the middle of a field. They survived several freezing nights together, and Julian figured now was the time to propose, being that they may not survive. But Carolyn said no. They were both rescued, but what was shocking was Julian was eventually arrested. He told police that he had staged the entire thing in hopes that a traumatic situation would make Carolyn say yes. He was found guilty of kidnapping in 2009.
My mom had a friend, goes on a date with a guy, and she's at the table with him, and she feels very like a ominous feeling looking at this man. She's like, I'm looking at him, and I can see like there's nothing behind his eyes, like there's just something that I don't like about this guy. To the point where she went into a payphone at the restaurant, called her brother, and was like, can you please come pick me up like immediately? And she was like, I'm just creeped out by this guy. I can't explain it. I'm creeped out. Now, this man had picked her up from her house. So the brother had a paper route. He's leaving the next morning at 5 a.m., sees some ruffling in the bushes, right? Like whatever, sees a guy running out of the bushes, says, holy shit, whatever, runs back in the house. Sister wakes up, says he was wearing like a beige jacket. She's like, that's the guy I was on a date with. He was like waiting. He must have been like waiting for me, right? Life goes on. What a psycho, lunatic boyfriend. 3 years later, Ted Bundy on the news. Oh, he had committed murders but had not been famous for it yet. She said when he saw him, she literally almost fell out of her chair because she was like, that look, his face configures and contorts to something that looks so sinister that she literally was like, get me away from him now.
Let's talk about this list, shall we? The zodiac signs of the most famous serial killers. The most surprising thing about this list is that Scorpio is not on it. How motherfucking ever. A name that is missing from this list is the Zodiac Killer, who a team of codebreakers has decided was Gary Francis Post, who's a Scorpio. So we don't know if that's true or not. But if it's true, he is a Scorpio. He would be the one Scorpio added to this list. Have you ever seen a Scorpio pop off? It is so frightening. Anyway, enough about Scorpio. Let's discuss the signs that are on this list. For those of you who don't believe in astrology, how can you explain that there's only 4 signs included in this long list? That's wild. The next craziest part is that there's one sign from each element. For fire signs, it's Sagittarius. For air signs, it's Gemini. For water signs, it's Pisces. And for earth signs, it's Virgo. Virgo shows up the most. That's crazy. You know that their crime scenes are immaculate, though. You know they're bleaching those crime scenes within an inch of their lives. And they're perfectionists, so no stone is left unturned. Gemini being included the next most frequently is not surprising to anybody. Jeffrey Dahmer, who is the subject of the new Netflix limited series Dahmer, is a Gemini. Pisces is surprising to nobody either because they let shit build up and then they explode. Have you ever had a Pisces go off on you? Sagittarius, most surprising, but they're only listed 4 times here. Sagittarius is chaotic and impulsive. I don't know, you mix that with mental health issues and I could see it happening.
As if butchering this family wasn't enough, the killer then took a shit in their toilet and ate all their ice cream. The Miyazawa family lived in a house in Setagaya, Japan. The family of 4 had been living in the house for a decade, and it was a duplex style, so their grandma actually lived in the unit directly next to them, but they didn't share an entrance. Most of the neighborhood had already moved out at this time. This was partially because the house was right next to a skate park and it would get really rowdy and noisy, and the week before the murders, the dad actually went over and confronted some of the teenagers. A stranger's car had also parked in front of their house, which they found creepy. Animals like cats and rats were also showing up tortured and killed around their neighborhood. On the night of December 30th, 2000, the family was killed around 11:30 p.m. the day before New Year's. The next morning, the grandmother became concerned after finding the phone lines were dead and the killer had actually cut their phone lines. This is when she discovered all 4 family members had been brutally murdered. Police determined that the killer entered the house by climbing a tree and getting in through an open window on the second floor bathroom. This was also the side of the house that was directly facing the skate park. He then strangled their 6-year-old son Ray with his bare hands. The dad, Mikio, must have heard this because he then rushed upstairs and fought the killer, injuring him. The killer stabbed Mikio in the head with a sashimi knife and it actually broke off inside his head before he moved on to killing the mom and daughter. Yasuko and 8-year-old Nina were the most violently attacked, and this was with a knife from inside the house. What's weird is that the killer then remained inside the house for up to 10 hours. He accessed the family's computer at 1:18 a.m. He also went into their kitchen and drank 4 bottles of tea and ate 4 ice creams. He also left his poop inside the toilet without flushing. Since Mikio injured him while trying to defend his family, the killer also tended to his wounds using the family's first aid kit. From this, the police were able to extract DNA, and they found no matches, but they did find out that the killer was half white, half Asian. Despite the house being filled with dead bodies, the killer also took a nap on the couch. He also must have changed clothes before leaving, because the police found a bucket hat, a scarf, a sweater, a jacket, jeans, and South Korean-made shoes inside the house that didn't belong to the family. The sweater the killer was wearing had only sold 10 units in the Setagaya area and 130 throughout the country, but they still weren't able to track down who bought these. Inside the fanny pack, the police found grip tape, which is often used by skaters, and they also found sand that was connected back to an Air Force base in California. The police have also said that the killer must have been 15 to 30 years old and of a healthy physique since he was able to climb the tree and get into the house. It's surprising that no DNA matches have been found, but it seems likely that this person has ties to the military or maybe even the mob, and that's why they haven't been identified yet.
Photos with disturbing backstories, PT 18.
The Long Island serial killer has finally allegedly been caught, almost 13 years after he murdered 4 women on Long Island, New York. The Long Island serial killer, or LISK case, is a case that's haunted people for years, and it really was launched in 2010 when 4 women's bodies were discovered in Long Island, New York. 4 women who would be known as the Gilgo 4. These 4 women, Melissa, Maureen, Megan, and Amber, were all sex workers in the New York City area, and they had all at the time of their disappearances seemingly vanished from the face of the earth. All 4 of their bodies, though, were eventually found on Gilgo Beach in Long Island, New York. Now, these disappearances took place over a number of years. The earliest was in 2007 and the last was in 2010. But in total, there have actually been 7 bodies found in that area that people think may be linked to the same serial killer, including the unidentified remains of a toddler who was 16 to 24 months in age. And the sad thing about this is that that toddler was actually the daughter of another victim. This was confirmed through DNA and the remains that were found. which means that most likely the killer murdered both of them at the same time. So for years, the Lisk case was a huge case and nobody had any concrete leads. There was no DNA evidence. There were no surveillance videos. There was really nothing. That is, until just recently, today, when this guy was arrested. Rex Heuermann, a 59-year-old architect who worked in Manhattan but lived very close to Gilgo Beach. Rex, interestingly enough, is a family man. He's married, he has 2 kids, and he works in a powerful position at the architecture firm that he's employed with. Authorities had been searching for a link between Heuermann and the Gilgo 4 for a long time, but finally, just recently, they got a break when they recovered this pizza box from a garbage can. And when they tested some of the DNA that was found on this pizza box pictured here, it was almost a perfect match to the DNA found on the hair of victim Megan Waterman. At this point, though, there are a lot of things that allegedly link Rex to this case. For example, cell phone bills show that he met with 3 of the victims before they went missing. Records from a burner cell phone that he was using also show that Rex placed menacing phone calls to the relative of Melissa Barthélemy, who was a victim of his. He also had a fake profile on Tinder, and he extensively contacted massage parlors and different escort services trying to arrange these sexual liaisons. Now, what's interesting and that I don't see a lot of people talking about on here is that his wife's DNA has also been connected to the murders. Apparently, authorities collected a water bottle from outside of the Heuermann home, and his wife's DNA was a match to a piece of female hair that they found on tape that was used to bind 2 of the victims, and it was also a match to DNA that was found on a belt that was used to tie up a victim's feet. One of his phones also was linked to tons of disturbing searches. I'm talking about CP, I'm talking about assault material, watching videos of women who were tied up with bruised faces, all this horrific stuff. And the cell phone also conducted tons of searches about the Long Island serial killer, why they hadn't caught him yet, and all other sorts of weird things that tie into the case. So what do you think? Is this Lisk? Let me know in the comments below and I'll keep you updated as soon as we find out more.
9-year-old Jessica Lunsford was kidnapped from her home and she was buried alive while clutching her favourite soft toy. Her murder is one of the most horrific ones I've ever heard. Jessica was born on October 6, 1995. She loved to sing, excelled in school, and liked to ride on the back of her dad's motorbike. On January 24, 2005, Jessica's dad Mark heard Jessica's alarm going off in her room, so he went to check on her, only Jessica wasn't there. She was missing along with her favourite stuffed toy, a blue dolphin. Her school clothes were still neatly laid out and her bedroom window was closed, so Mark went to check the front door and found it unlocked. Jessica was reported missing immediately. A search for Jessica soon began, but an Amber Alert couldn't be issued, as it requires law enforcement to describe the vehicle that might have been used in the abduction, and there were no witnesses, so that information couldn't be provided. Volunteers, officers on horseback, a police helicopter and a dive team were all out searching for Jessica, but weeks went by with absolutely no leads. Police eventually enlisted the help of child abduction experts, and 208 sex offenders within 50 miles of Jessica's home were identified. This led police to a man named John Cooey, who was a registered sex offender. He lived 2 miles from Jessica's home but often stayed with his sister, who actually lived within eyeshot of Jessica's front door. John was questioned and agreed to a lie detector, and when the results came back, he looked at the officer and said, "You don't need to tell me the results, I already know what they are," and he confessed to the abduction and murder of 9-year-old Jessica. He told officers where they could find Jessica's body, and it was discovered that she'd been buried just 200 yards from her front door, in John's sister's backyard. The true horror of Jessica's abduction and murder soon came to light. Trigger warning here because her murder is horrific. John said that he'd entered Jessica's home at 3 a.m. and found her in her bedroom. He'd woken her up and told her not to scream. He'd then taken her to his sister's house, where he'd kept her for the weekend in a closet, only bringing her out to rape her and taunt her with articles showing that everybody was out looking for her. When John decided that he was done with Jessica, he told her to climb into a large bin bag, saying that he'd take her home but didn't want anyone to see her. In actual fact, she was never going home. She climbed into that bin bag thinking that the horror was over, but he tied it up, threw her into a pre-dug grave, and buried her alive. When Jessica was discovered, she was clutching her dolphin tightly, and she'd managed to poke 2 fingers through a hole in the bin bag in an attempt to escape. She'd suffocated to death alone in the dark and absolutely terrified. John Cooey was found guilty and sentenced to death in 2005, but he actually died of natural causes while in prison just 4 years later.